Elias lived a life painted in broad, simple strokes. A loving wife, children who grew and left the nest, and the quiet rhythm of a small town. Yet, in the attic of his mind, a single, unfulfilled commitment lay dormant, covered by the slow accumulation of decades. It was a vow made under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree, whispered to a girl with eyes like the summer sky. Her name was Lena, and she was leaving. He had sworn to wait. Life, however, did not wait. It moved forward, carrying Elias with it. He fell in love again, built a home, and the vibrant colors of his present life slowly painted over the faded memory of that youthful pledge. The promise to Lena became a ghost, a whisper so faint he no longer heard it. It was only after his wife passed, in the profound silence of his empty house, that the past began to stir. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, his fingers brushed against a small wooden chest. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the window as he lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed letters, lay a small, hand-carved bird and a faded photograph of two smiling children beneath an enormous tree. The memory struck him not like lightning, but like the slow, inexorable rising of a tide. The promise. A quiet urgency took hold of him. It wasn't about rekindling a lost love, but about honoring the boy he once was. He needed to go back. The journey to his childhood town felt like traveling through time. The familiar streets were now lined with unfamiliar buildings, but the old park, miraculously, remained. And there it stood, the great oak, more gnarled and weathered, a silent witness to countless seasons. He sat on a bench, the small carved bird clutched in his hand. He didn't expect Lena to appear. He knew she had lived her own life, just as he had. He was there for himself, to close a circle that had been left open for far too long. After a long while, he stood up, walked to the base of the tree, and placed the wooden bird among its ancient roots. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above, as if the tree was acknowledging the gesture. A profound sense of peace washed over him. He had kept his word, not in the waiting, but in the remembering. As he walked away, he felt lighter. The fine, settled powder of a long-ago vow finally released into the wind. Subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and soul. We explore tales of love, loss, and the moments that define us. Don't miss out on your next favorite narrative. Join our community. He lived surrounded by paper and silence. Stacks of books with cracked spines rose from the floor, and loose sheets covered every surface, a sea of words and sketches. His small room smelled of aging paper, worn leather, and the sharp metallic tang of ink that hung perpetually in the air. The only light came from a single window that overlooked a quiet alley and a small desk lamp that cast a warm, golden circle on his workspace. He was an old man whose world had shrunk to the space between these four walls, but he felt no confinement. His true universe existed on the countless pages he so carefully filled each day. His most defining feature was his hands. The skin on his fingers and under his nails was a permanent mosaic of blue and black, a map of smudges that no soap could ever conquer. They were not stains of carelessness, but the proud, indelible marks of a lifetime dedicated to his craft. Every morning, with a quiet and deliberate ritual, he would sit at his worn wooden desk. He would choose a nib, fit it into its holder, and uncap a small glass pot of India ink. The sharp, scratching sound of the pen moving across the textured paper was the steady rhythm of his life, a sound more comforting to him than any melody. Sometimes he wrote fantastical stories of airborne ships and cities made of crystal. Other times, he drew intricate maps of imaginary continents or sketched the faces of people from his distant past, giving them new life on paper. He was neither a famous author nor a celebrated artist. No publisher called his name, and no gallery displayed his work. His creations were for an audience of one. His work was a private, intimate conversation between his soul and the blank page waiting before him. It was a world built solely for his own joy and contemplation. The ink was more than just a tool. It was an extension of his being. It flowed from the bottle, through the pen, and from his very thoughts onto the page. The stains on his hands told the story of his quiet passion, his unwavering dedication, and his solitary happiness. With every line he drew and every word he formed, he poured a piece of himself into his creations. He was a keeper of memories, a weaver of dreams, and a silent guardian of tales that only his stained hands could tell. In the gentle glow of his desk lamp, he would work late into the night, his focus absolute, leaving behind a vast and secret legacy written in ink. The dust of Providence Gulch settled on Silas's worn boots. The town was a skeleton, its buildings bleached by the sun. Locals spoke of a strange echo in the canyon, a tale Silas dismissed as folklore. He was a man chasing a rumor of forgotten gold, not ghosts. For days, his pickaxe struck only barren rock. Frustrated, he let out a yell that tore through the silence. What came back was not his own voice. A dry, sorrowful whisper returned from the cliffs. "He took it all." Silas froze. He called out again, "Who's there?" A chorus of faint overlapping voices answered, fragments of old arguments and desperate pleas. These weren't sounds, but memories trapped in the stone. He learned the town's history from decaying records in the sheriff's office. A founder had promised prosperity, but fled with every ounce of gold, leaving his partners to starve. The Gulch had never forgotten the betrayal. Its rock walls held the lingering sorrow of the men who had been wronged. Silas returned to the canyon mouth, not with a shout, but with a quiet promise. He spoke of his own hard past, explaining he sought not a fortune, but a second chance. The air stilled. Then a single clear whisper, different from the others, echoed back, "Beneath the crooked juniper." There Silas found a small but pure vein of gold. It was not the great treasure of the legends, but it was enough. It was a gift from the spirits of the Gulch, a final act of providence for a man who approached them with respect instead of greed. When he rode away, the canyon behind him was peaceful, its long-held story finally heard. Ilara lived in a house that seemed to hold its breath, a quiet building filled with the silent belongings of people she had never met. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and lavender. Dust motes danced like tiny fairies in the slivers of golden light that pierced the gloom of the attic, a place of forgotten treasures and sleeping memories. One particularly rainy afternoon, the drumming of water on the roof her only company, she was sifting through a heavy cedar trunk full of yellowed linens. Her fingers, numb from the chill, brushed against something hard and smooth. It was a small wooden box, no larger than her palm. It was utterly plain, made of a dark, unidentifiable wood, without any carvings, inlay, or even a lock. It seemed sealed shut, a solid, seamless block of wood. A strange curiosity piqued. She tried to pry it open with her fingernails, but there were no joints or seams to be found. Frustrated, she shook it gently next to her ear, but it made no sound. It was strangely light, feeling almost hollow. Acting on a sudden, childish impulse she didn't quite understand, she lifted the box to her ear again, pressing it close as if it were a seashell from a distant, unknown ocean. At first, there was only the rushing sound of her own blood, her own breathing. Then another sound emerged, so faint it was more a feeling than a noise, as delicate as the touch of a moth's wing. It was a whisper. The voice was faint and ageless, a soft and gentle murmur. It didn't speak of secrets or fortunes, nor did it give any grand commands. Instead, it whispered of small, forgotten joys. It spoke of the earthy scent of baking bread on a cold winter morning, the feeling of cool, squishy mud between one's toes after a summer rain, and the quiet awe of seeing the first star appear in the deep blue of the twilight sky. It described the sweet, bursting taste of a single sun-warmed berry picked straight from the bush. Each whispered phrase painted a vivid sensory picture, a fleeting moment of simple, profound happiness. Ilara sat motionless on the dusty floorboards, the box pressed firmly to her ear, listening to this gentle, flowing stream of memories. She knew, with a sudden, bone-deep certainty, that these were her great-grandmother's memories. The stories her father had often told her, of a woman who saw poetry in the mundane and found beauty in the smallest things, suddenly came to life. The box was not a magical artifact in the way of fairy tales. It was a vessel for something far more precious, a legacy of moments, a collection of love passed down in the quietest, most humble way imaginable. From that day on, the old house no longer felt empty or lonely. It felt full of stories waiting to be heard. The little wooden box became Ilara's most cherished possession. Whenever she felt lost or adrift in the world, she would hold it close and listen to the whispers from the past. A comforting reminder that a life is not built on grand events, but on the simple, beautiful moments we choose to hold dear. Elias inserted the key into the lock, just as he did every evening. His day had been a monotonous grey, a perfect copy of the one before. But something was different today. A small, folded sheet of paper was taped to the wood of his front door. It was not a bill or an official notice. The writing was a delicate, looping script. He carefully peeled it off and read the few words written in blue ink. "Sometimes it's good to look up." He frowned, glancing up instinctively at the stained ceiling of the corridor. Nothing. He looked down the empty hallway, then shrugged and entered his quiet apartment. But the note had planted a seed of curiosity. The next day, as he walked home from the bus stop, he found himself looking up. He saw the intricate patterns of tree branches against the evening sky, something he had not noticed in years. Another note appeared a few days later. "The cat from number 7 likes to sleep on the warm hood of the red car." Elias peered out his window. Sure enough, a fluffy ginger cat was curled up on the car, a perfect circle of warmth and peace. A small smile touched his lips for the first time that week. The mysterious notes became a silent conversation. They pointed out the little details of life that his own loneliness had hidden from him. A tiny flower growing through a crack in the pavement, the sound of a child's laughter from the park, the way the rain created a shimmering curtain outside his window. He began to anticipate the messages. They were a bright spot in his routine. He started seeing the world through new eyes, actively searching for the small wonders his anonymous friend might be seeing. He felt a strange connection to this person he had never met. The crushing weight of solitude began to lift, replaced by a gentle sense of shared observation. One evening, he decided to reply. He took a piece of paper and a pen and wrote a simple question. After a moment of hesitation, he taped it to his door before going to sleep, his heart beating with a hopeful rhythm he had not felt in a very long time. The midday sun was a relentless hammer on the dry, cracked earth. The air vibrated with heat, distorting the horizon line into a flickering mirage. Against this backdrop of immensity and silence, where life seemed to have given up, a dark spot began to stir. Far, far away, it was just an indistinct speck, an error in the desolate perfection of the landscape. With deliberate slowness, the figure took shape. It became the silhouette of a man on horseback, advancing with a determination that contrasted with the apathy of the surroundings. They were a single entity, the rider and his mount, fused by the sun and the dust into a moving statue. The horse, with its dark coat covered in a grayish dust, walked with a firm, economical stride, a testament to long distances covered. His ears moved, attentive to the slightest sound that dared to break the stillness. The man stood straight in the saddle, his body swaying in perfect sync with the animal. A wide-brimmed hat cast a deep shadow over his face, concealing features and intentions. His clothes, worn and faded, spoke of a long journey and countless days and nights under the open sky. He carried no visible luggage, only the essentials for survival and perhaps the weight of an unknown purpose. Who was he? Where did he come from? Where was he going? The questions floated in the hot air, unanswered. He could be a vigilante seeking revenge, a messenger with urgent news that could change destinies, or just another wandering soul looking for a place to call his own in a world that seemed to have no space left. For the inhabitants of the small outpost that rose up ahead, a collection of weather-beaten wooden buildings, his arrival was an event. The children stopped playing in the dusty street and ran inside. The conversations on the porches fell silent. Behind the curtains, eyes followed his approach with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and a hint of hope. In that isolated place, a stranger was always a promise of change, for better or worse. He kept moving forward, indifferent to the stairs, his eyes fixed on a point beyond the settlement, as if his true destination lay even further away, in the heart of that vast and merciless horizon. In the heart of the village, where the comforting scent of coal smoke and hot metal hung permanently in the air, stood Cale's forge. It was more than a simple workshop. It was a place of constant transformation, the true soul of the community. Cale, the blacksmith, was a man built like his own creations, sturdy, reliable, with broad shoulders and hands that knew the secret language of iron and fire. For generations, the ringing sound of his hammer striking the anvil had been the village's steady heartbeat. It was a familiar rhythm of daily life that marked the rising of the sun and called the workers home from the fields when it set. On this day, however, the rhythm was different. It was slower, more deliberate, each pause filled with a heavy weight. A tense silence lay over the valley, a silence Kyle was tasked to break, not with the sharp clang of swords, but with a gentle song of peace. On his anvil lay a lump of metal, glowing with the fierce fury of the forge's heart. It was a special metal, born from two great swords, once belonging to rival chieftains whose feud had cost countless lives. Now, their weapons were melted together in the crucible's intense heat. From this fiery union of past conflict, Cale was to forge a single, unbroken circle. He lifted his hammer, its familiar weight a solid comfort in his calloused palm. The first strike landed true, and a brilliant shower of orange sparks danced in the dim light of the forge. The sound echoed, clear and pure, a single note that seemed to hang in the air, promising a new beginning. He worked tirelessly, turning the glowing metal, his movements a practiced, graceful dance of strength and precision. Each blow from the hammer was a prayer. Each turn of the iron on the anvil was a hope. The fire in the forge roared, breathing its hot life into the metal, making it soft and willing to change. Kyle's face, lit by the orange glow, was a mask of intense concentration. He understood he was not just shaping a piece of iron. He was shaping the fragile future of two peoples. Throughout the long night, the forge was the only thing truly alive in the sleeping village. The rhythmic song of the hammer and anvil continued, a lonely vigil against the deep darkness of old hatreds. With every strike, the metal became thinner, longer, gracefully curving into a perfect loop under Kyle's expert guidance. He coaxed it, persuaded it, until the two ends finally met. With a final, delicate fusion in the fire's white-hot core and a few last, gentle taps of the hammer, the circle was complete and seamless. As the first light of dawn crept over the mountains, casting a soft, hopeful grey light into the workshop, Kyle held the finished piece up. It was a simple, unadorned band, its surface smooth but showing the faint, honest marks of the hammer that made it. It was not a ring of power or magic, but one of profound promise. Its strength came not from any enchantment, but from the difficult, hard-won peace it represented. The song of the anvil had faded into the morning air, but its echo remained within the small, perfect circle, a testament to the powerful idea that even the hardest of materials, like the most stubborn of hearts, could be reshaped into something entirely new. Arthur observed his son, Leo, as he navigated the house with the quiet efficiency of a stranger. The vibrant energy that once saw him sliding down the banister and filling every corner with sound had evaporated. Now a young man with downcast eyes moved in his place, his world seemingly confined to the glowing screen of his phone. The stillness he left in his wake was not peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the life from their home. Every evening, the dinner table became a stage for Arthur's failed attempts to connect. He would ask about school, about his son's friends, about his passion for drawing. Leo's replies were clipped, monosyllabic shields. Fine. Good. It's okay. Each word was a stone dropped into a well, making no ripple. Arthur would chew his food slowly, the taste of disappointment mixing with his meal. He longed for the days of rambling stories about teachers and shared laughter over silly jokes. He missed the feeling of knowing the person who sat just a few feet away. The worry gnawed at him, a relentless unease that kept him awake at night. He imagined the worst-case scenarios. Was Leo being targeted at school? Was he struggling with something he felt too ashamed to share? The most painful thought was that he himself was the cause. Had he been too strict or not strict enough? Had he missed a crucial sign? He sifted through years of memories, searching for the exact moment the invisible wall between them began to rise, brick by silent brick. One cool evening, Arthur found Leo on the back porch, hunched over in a chair watching the sun dip below the horizon. The urge to bombard him with questions was strong, but Arthur fought it down. Instead, he quietly retrieved another chair and sat beside him. He didn't offer advice or demands. He simply existed in that space with his son, a silent companion to his solitude. They watched the sky bleed from orange to purple, the only sounds being the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. The silence stretched, but it began to change its nature. It was no longer a void of separation, but a shared, breathable space. Finally, in a voice so low it was almost carried away by the breeze, Leo spoke. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be." He didn't turn his head. His gaze remained fixed on the deepening twilight. It wasn't a confession or a full story, but it was an opening. It was a crack in the wall. Arthur felt a wave of relief wash over him, so potent it almost brought tears to his eyes. He reached out and placed a firm, reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. In that shared stillness, a profound understanding passed between them, more eloquent than any conversation. The quiet had finally been broken, not by noise, but by a single, honest truth. The dust danced in the beams of light coming through the window, illuminating a room full of cardboard boxes. In the center of it all, a figure moved slowly, almost as if in a ritual. Each object he picked up was heavy, not because of its mass, but because of its history. A coffee mug with a chipped handle was one of the first things to be wrapped. It wasn't just a container, but the memory of lazy mornings, of conversations that stretched into the afternoon, and the comfort of a hot drink on cold days. She carefully wrapped it in newspaper, as if to protect her own memories from breaking on the journey ahead. Then came a pile of books. The worn spines told their own story of train journeys and sleepless nights. As she flipped through one of them, an old movie ticket fell out of the pages, a small rectangle of paper that transported her to another era, to another version of herself. She smiled with nostalgia. Next to it, a wooden box held old photographs, smiling faces frozen in time. Some of these people were no longer part of her life, but their smiles remained intact. He hesitated for a moment before closing the lid. They were happy ghosts who deserved a place in the future. Deciding what to take with her and what to leave behind was an exercise in curating her own existence. Each item placed in the keep box was a piece of the puzzle she had become. Each object in the donate pile was a release, a gentle goodbye to a past that no longer served her. It was an emotional rather than a physical process, a silent conversation with her past self. The walls, now almost bare, seemed larger, emptier. The echo of his footsteps filled the space where there had once been laughter, music, and the familiar sound of everyday life. He looked at the sealed boxes, each with a simple label: kitchen, bedroom, books. No label could capture the true essence of what was inside. Kitchen contained not only plates and cutlery, but the flavor of dinners with friends and the solitude of hurried meals. The boxes were treasure chests of a life lived intensely in that place, time capsules ready to be opened in a new setting. As he taped up the last box, the sound tore through the silence and seemed definitive. She took a deep breath. The space was empty, but she felt complete, ready. She was taking with her what really mattered, leaving behind only the walls that had witnessed everything. Her story was not in the house, but in the boxes, and above all, inside it. The attic air was thick with the heavy scent of old wood and forgotten time. Dust motes danced in the single sunbeam that pierced the gloom. It was there, tucked away under a pile of yellowed lace, that Ilara found it. A small, intricately carved wooden box. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded crimson velvet, lay a single photograph. It was a sepia portrait of a young woman, her hair styled in soft waves from a bygone era. Her gaze was direct and bold, with a hint of mischief playing in her eyes, though her smile seemed to hold a secret sadness. There was something deeply and unsettlingly familiar about her features. The curve of her cheek, the shape of her eyes. It was like looking at a reflection of herself in a distorted antique mirror. Ilara carried the picture downstairs to her grandmother, who was peacefully sipping tea in the sunlit kitchen. When she saw the image, her grandmother's warm expression faltered, a shadow passing over her face. She dismissed it as a distant cousin, someone long gone, and quickly steered the conversation to lighter topics. But her tense shoulders and averted gaze told a different story, a story of deliberate forgetting. This evasiveness only fueled Ilara's curiosity. For the next few days, Ilara dedicated herself to the past. She pored over dusty, leather-bound family albums, their pages brittle with age. She saw generations of her family staring back, stern-faced great-grandparents, joyful couples on their wedding days, and countless babies wrapped in baptismal gowns. But the mysterious woman from the photograph was nowhere to be seen. It was as if she had been meticulously and deliberately erased from the family's history. Then, tucked away in the back of an old cedar wardrobe, she discovered a small, locked diary. It belonged to her great-grandmother. After carefully prying the lock open, her heart pounded as she turned the fragile pages. The elegant looping script told a story of heartbreak and a forbidden love. The woman in the photograph was her great-grandmother's younger sister, Liana. She was described as a free spirit, a vibrant soul who had fallen for a traveling musician, a man the staunchly traditional family deemed entirely unworthy. Faced with an impossible ultimatum, Liana had chosen love over family. She was disowned, and her name was forbidden from ever being spoken again. This one hidden photograph was the only thing her grieving sister had dared to keep. With the diary clutched in her hand, Ilara approached her grandmother again. This time, faced with the written truth, the older woman's dam of silence broke. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks as the story, buried under decades of pain and shame, finally came to light. The silence had been a shield, but it had also become a prison, creating a void in their family's narrative. Looking at the photograph now, Ilara no longer saw a stranger. She saw a part of her own legacy, a story of courage that had been waiting patiently to be rediscovered. The face was no longer a mystery, but a vital link to a past she was now determined to reclaim and honor. He lived in a house where time was not measured by the ticking of the clock, but by the thin layer that slowly accumulated on all things. For him, it wasn't dirt. It was a soft mantle woven by the years that passed in silence. Each particle was a second, each layer a day, and the whole was the tangible story of his life. His movements were careful, as if he feared disturbing the fragile sleep of memories. He passed the piano in the living room, whose black and white keys were barely distinguishable under the grey veil. Sometimes he closed his eyes and could almost hear the melody his wife was playing, an old song now muffled by the stillness. He didn't dare touch it, as he felt the sound would be too loud for the sacred silence of the house. In the hallway, the faces in the family portraits were becoming blurred, as if the memories themselves were fading. The children's smiles, their boyish features, everything was veiled. Cleaning the glass felt like an act of betrayal, as if by removing the layer of dust she was erasing the physical presence of the time they had shared in that space. She let them be, kept under that protection. One afternoon, a solitary ray broke through the gloom and landed on the mantelpiece, illuminating a small music box. The beam of light revealed a whirlwind of dancing particles, a silent, hypnotic ballet that caught his attention. In that movement, Elias saw a kind of life, a pulse in the still heart of the house. He felt an impulse he hadn't felt for years. He approached slowly, his feet dragging on the wooden floor. He stopped in front of the small box, the birthday present he had given his wife decades ago. He raised a trembling hand, not to clean it, but to touch it. With the tip of his finger, he drew a soft line on the lid, opening a path in the grey mantle. The dark, polished wood gleamed underneath. It wasn't an act of cleaning, but of rediscovery. A faint smile formed on his lips. The house was still silent, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't seem empty. Elias lived his life within the comfort of well-organized data. As a junior archivist for the Central Registry, he spent his days curating the official history of their city, a chronicle of peace and prosperity born from the ashes of the Great Renewal. The narrative was simple and comforting. Their ancestors had survived a global collapse, rebuilding civilization with logic and harmony. Everyone knew this story. It was the foundation of their serene existence. One afternoon, while running a routine diagnostic on deep storage servers, an anomaly flickered across his screen. It was a corrupted file, a ghost in the machine scheduled for deletion. Curiosity, however, made him pause. He isolated the fragment and managed to restore a few seconds of audio-visual data. It was not the heroic imagery of the renewal he was used to. Instead, he saw panicked faces and heard screams drowned out by a low, mechanical hum. The architecture in the background was familiar, but twisted by fire and fear. He dismissed it as a glitch, a digital hallucination. Yet the images lingered in his mind, unsettling him. He began to look for similar corruptions, venturing into forgotten digital catacombs, where he found more fragments, tiny pieces of a forbidden puzzle. A censored census report showed a population drop of 70% in a single year. Architectural plans revealed the city's peaceful public squares were originally designed as containment zones. A personal log, its author's name scrubbed, described a cleansing, not a renewal. The pieces began to connect, not in a sudden flash, but with the slow, cold dread of a sunrise revealing a battlefield. The truth settled upon him with a chilling clarity. His ancestors were not the survivors of the collapse. They were the cause. The Great Renewal was not an act of creation, but of erasure. They had not built a new world from the ruins. They had built it on top of the silenced bodies of those who disagreed with their rigid vision of harmony. The peace of his city was the peace of a well-managed cemetery. The order was the result of a systematic extermination of all dissent, all chaos, all unwanted humanity. The serene smiles on the faces of his neighbors were the smiles of ignorance, of people living a beautiful lie. He looked out his window at the gleaming spires and manicured parks, but he no longer saw a utopia. He saw a pristine cage built on a foundation of forgotten bones. The knowledge was a perfect, terrible weight inside him. The world had not changed, but his perception of it had been irrevocably shattered, leaving him alone with an unbearable understanding. Arthur had always dreamed of a house with a soul, When he found the old Victorian building at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street, he knew he was home. The wooden floors creaked like they were telling stories, and the tall windows let in a soft, dusty light. He was a man who enjoyed his own company, and this house seemed to promise the perfect solitude for his work as a writer. The first week was peaceful. The second week, however, the house began to reveal its other inhabitant. It started with small things. His favorite pen, always left on the right side of his desk, would appear on the left. A book he had just finished would be back on the shelf, neatly tucked between its neighbors. At first, he blamed his own absent-mindedness. Getting old, he'd mutter to himself with a smile. But the oddities grew more specific. A cold draft would snake around his ankles in a room with sealed windows. He would hear the soft rustle of a page turning in the library when he was in the kitchen. He was not a man easily frightened, but a persistent feeling of being watched began to settle upon him. It wasn't menacing, just present. One afternoon, a chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. On his pillow lay a small, tarnished silver locket. He hadn't seen it in over 30 years. It had belonged to his grandmother and had been lost during a family move when he was just a child. His hands trembled as he picked it up. This was no longer a case of a creaky house or a forgetful mind. There was someone else here. Instead of fear, a profound curiosity bloomed in his chest. He stood in the middle of the living room and spoke to the empty air. "Hello," he said, his voice feeling loud in the silence. "Is someone here?" A faint scent of lavender and old paper filled the air for a moment before vanishing. It was an answer. From that day on, Arthur began to live with his ghost. He learned its habits. The ghost liked order and would often tidy up his scattered papers when he left the room in a creative mess. It seemed to enjoy music, as the old record player he'd bought but rarely used would sometimes click on, playing a soft classical melody that filled the house with a serene atmosphere. Arthur started talking to it, narrating his day, sharing his frustrations and small victories. He would read passages from his new book aloud, and the presence in the house felt attentive, almost comforting, like an encouraging friend listening in the quiet. He eventually visited the local archives and learned about Ilara, the home's first and only other owner. She had been a librarian who passed away peacefully within its walls almost a century ago, a woman who had loved books, solitude, and her home above all else. He wasn't living in a haunted house. He was sharing his home with a kindred spirit. The ghost was not a frightening entity to be exorcised, but a quiet companion who, like him, had found her perfect sanctuary and never wanted to leave. The house was no longer just his, it was theirs, and for the first time in his life, Arthur never felt truly alone. Ilara and Liam were the last of their line, a lineage linked to the very soil of their valley. For generations, their family had guarded the village, but now a creeping shadow threatened to consume everything. The forest at the edge of the fields darkened, its trees twisted into grotesque shapes, and a strange silence fell over the land, broken only by the whispers of the wind. The villagers became pale and weak, their laughter fading into silent despair. The elders spoke of an ancient curse, a plague that had once been contained by the founders of the village. Ilara, leaning over old parchments in her dusty attic, found the truth. It wasn't a curse they were fighting, but a debt. Her ancestors had made a pact, a promise sealed with their own life force to keep the valley vibrant. Now, that promise was weakening. She explained everything to Liam. Their shared heritage gave them a unique power. A single drop from each of them, offered together, could rejuvenate the land. Liam, always impulsive, saw a quick solution. He wanted to perform a great ritual, give more and end the threat forever, but Ilara, cautious and wise, saw the danger. The scrolls warned that such a sacrifice would require the ultimate price. One night, the shadow advanced. A tentacle of darkness, cold and life-draining, infiltrated the village square. Panic broke out. Liam, seeing the fear in a child's eyes, rushed forward, ready to act on his own. Ilara grabbed his arm, firmly. "Together," she insisted. "It has to be together." They stood before the approaching darkness, holding hands. With a shared nod, they made a small cut in their palms with a silver knife. As their blood mixed and fell onto the withered ground, a wave of golden light erupted from the earth. The light pulsed, warm and pure, pushing the shadow back into the forest. The effort left them breathless and exhausted, leaning on each other for support. They hadn't won the war, but they had won the battle. They realized then that their strength lay not in individual sacrifice, but in their unbreakable bond, a legacy that ran through their veins and connected them to each other and to their home. He spent his life fighting for every inch. Each negotiation was a battle, every acquisition a conquered territory. He believed that the more he owned, the more solid his world would become. His feet needed to stand on land that was unequivocally his, marked on a map and protected by a deed. He saw others as rivals in a great contest for space and recognition, for a tangible legacy. His identity was tied to the size of his shadow, and he worked tirelessly to make it stretch far and wide, covering everything he could reach. When he finally secured the most coveted plot, he stood on a hill overlooking his vast domain. The papers were signed, the rivals defeated. Yet, as the sun set, an unsettling silence fell, not just over the land, but within him. The victory felt hollow, the expansive view strangely confining. He had won the world he had fought for, but in the process had forgotten why he was fighting. The ground beneath his expensive shoes felt no different from any other patch of dirt. It offered no real support, no genuine peace. This profound emptiness sparked a quiet retreat. He stepped away from the maps and the contracts, and for the first time explored the uncharted territory within himself. He found a landscape neglected for years, overgrown with anxiety and starved of simple joy. Slowly, patiently, he began to tend to this inner space. He learned to listen to his own thoughts without judgment, to find contentment in a single breath, and to value connection over competition. He discovered that true stability wasn't something one could buy or conquer. He learned that the most vital foundation isn't made of soil or stone, but of self-awareness and inner peace. It is a space inside where one can stand firm, regardless of the storms raging outside. This internal footing allows a person to walk through the world with a quiet confidence that no deed or title can provide. It is from this inner anchor that one can truly connect with others and build a life of meaning. All the other battles for territory seemed insignificant now. He had finally found the one place that could never be taken away.